Welcome, friends, to another edition of Economic Update. It's a weekly analysis of the economic developments, the trends, the breakthroughs, the key events that shape our lives, our incomes, our jobs, our prospects for jobs, the prices we pay, the interest rates we face, everything in the realm of economics, and that touches nearly everything. I'm your host, Richard Wolff. I've been a professor of economics all my adult life, and I currently teach in the New School University here in New York City. I also write economic columns for a number of publications, including truthout.org, an independent, really original and powerful news service that provides daily information at no charge to interested people. Check them out at truthout.org. If this program and the kinds of analyses we present are of interest to you, please know that you can get much more of this at the two websites that we maintain. The first one is rdwolff.com, and the second one is democracyatwork.info. Both of them have different kinds of materials, but they go into depth on the very subjects that we cover in this program, and so I urge you to make use of them. There is, of course, no charge. Also, both websites provide you with a way of sending us comments, criticisms, suggestions, questions. We read every one of them, and we use these things to shape our program, the topics we cover, the way we approach items. We also pick one or two to answer on each program to keep a back-and-forth relationship with you, the folks for whom this program is made. Both websites provide you with a mechanism to send us your comments, your criticisms, your suggestions, your questions. Once again, rdwolff.com and democracyatwork.info. Let's turn then to the economic updates that we begin each program with that are short but say something important about what's going on. The first one has to do with a mayoral campaign in New York City. It is now pinning a Democrat, Bill de Blasio, against a Republican, Joseph Lota. And supporters of the Republican Joseph Lota have filed a lawsuit in federal court, and I think it teaches us something about the question about who controls politics in the United States. The lawsuit desires to allow individuals to contribute more than the current maximum to the independent political groups, political action committees they're usually called, that can provide much and often most of the funding to support parties and candidates. The current maximum is $150,000 per individual to be contributed to independent political groups. Wow. That does exclude, I would guess, most of you who are not in the business of having the kind of money that would make a $150,000 maximum on what you can contribute a problem. But it is for the wealthy sorts of people that are filing this suit. They want to help Mr. Lota, the Republican. It's understandable. In New York City, Democrats outnumber Republicans 6-1 in registrations. David Koch, some of you know, is already a major supporter of Mr. Lota, but he is working on a committee that's already working. This is a new committee that is filing suit because they want to allow the individuals who want to give big money beyond $150,000 to be able to do so. In case you're wondering whether this is a far-out kind of lawsuit that has no chance, according to the New York Times, these lawsuits have won in each case where they've been brought in the states of Hawaii, Vermont, and Wisconsin to date. So they're hopeful that they can affect the race here in New York by being able to get the folks who want to give more than $150,000, get them the legal right to do so. For those who are wondering whether money is buying politics, I think this story goes to support the famous saying, here in America, we have the best democracy money can buy. Excuse me. The second story is a tragedy, and it has been receiving some publicity. Normally, I don't go into stories that are already circulating on the grounds that you don't need me to repeat what you may have already heard. But this one deserves it, even if you have heard about it. It begins with the sad death of Margaret Mary Vojtka, V-O-J-T-K-A. I hope that's the right spelling. She died at age 83 of a heart attack, and a story was written by someone she knew, Daniel Kovalich, in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette on September 18th, 2013. It turns out that Margaret Mary, at age 83, had spent most of her life as an adjunct professor. Just to make sure we're all on the same page, let me remind you what that is. An adjunct professor is what about 2/3 of all professors at colleges and universities now are. It's a person who doesn't have a full-time job, who doesn't have any of the perks that go with a full-time job. These folks are paid between typically $2,000 and $5,000 per course, per 3-credit course per semester. And that's all. They don't get many, or if any, benefits. It's a new way of creating a precarious, underpaid, overworked core of teachers in higher education. It makes absolutely no sense from an educational perspective in terms of the quality of what is taught and what students can learn, but it does save the universities and colleges a ton of money because they can pay these folks much, much less than they used to pay the full-time professors whose job it was to keep up with what's happening in their field, to have the time and leisure to be researchers themselves, and thereby bring to their students the best, the latest, and the most thought-through kinds of instruction. We don't have that anymore. And Margaret Mary, was a victim. She died at 83, virtually penniless, going on welfare, because when she retired from Duquesne University, where she had worked for many, many years, she had nothing. No retirement help, no severance pay, no benefits. And she had been barely able to scrape by when she was working full-time, 3 or 4 courses a semester, earning $25,000 to $30,000 a year, unable to assemble any kind of savings. She died penniless, she died alone, and she died a victim of a system that is making this kind of precarious, underpaid, no benefits teaching condition the norm for the majority of teachers and higher education in the United States. It's a scandal for those involved. It was a death sentence for Margaret Mary. It is a tragedy for education, but it is a serious sign of the kinds of downgrading of everything that is happening inside of an American capitalism that cannot serve the population anymore, that is constricting and contracting and spewing its victims across the landscape. Margaret Mary was one of them. The next update has to do with an issue that comes up often, and that issue is what's happening to women workers in our economy, because women have traditionally gotten the short end of the stick when it comes to paid work, to advancement in their careers, and so on. So I wanted to bring you up to date with some important facts about what's happening to women workers in the American economy. We start with the latest statistics for August of 2013. That's the most recent month for which we have information. In that month, 125,000 jobs were gained by women in the United States. But while that is good news that there are at least more jobs, although, by the way, 125,000 women is less than the number of women entering the labor force, graduating from high school, and so on. So in terms of solving the unemployment problem among women, it's not enough. But here's the more important news. Out of the 125, nearly half, 54,000 jobs, were in the fields we call retail, leisure, and hospitality. That's being a clerk in a store, it's being a maid in a restaurant, a waitress, and so on. Most of those jobs were for less than 34 hours a week, so that the employer could get out of providing legal or union contract benefits. That basically means that not only is the condition of unemployment among women not improving in the month of August, but that most of the jobs women are able to get are at wages and salaries lower than what women used to get on average and insufficient to live in a reasonable way in American society. Here's another statistic for the year 2012, the last year for which we have complete statistics. The median income of women was $38,000. Median meaning half of women employed got more, half of women got less. What was the equivalent for men? Well, much, much more. Women's median income was only 77% of men's. The gap between men and women is not narrowing. It's staying at a very serious level that is disadvantageous to women. Now, what about the recent crisis? Well, taking the period from June 2009, the worst point of the crisis so far, up until June of 2013, those 4 years, women lost over 450,000 jobs in the public sector. In other words, when you hear about cities and towns and states cutting back on secretaries, on teachers, on social workers, and so on, the bulk of those people are women. The cutback in cities and states because of the crisis in our economy, which means cities and states are not getting the tax revenues they used to because millions are out of work, because millions of people are buying less, so they pay less in sales taxes. The crunch at the level of our cities and states has translated into laying off large numbers of public employees who are disproportionately women. 450,000 women lost their jobs in the public sector, only 290,000 men. People don't talk about it, but this way of handling an economic crisis is particularly disadvantageous to women. So I would suggest that before anyone considers that he or she understands the cost of this economic crisis, one area you might not have thought about is the disproportionate effect on women. Here's the last statistic. Since 2008, 2 million married women have dropped out of the labor force. That is, they no longer have a job and they're no longer looking for a job. They've given up. They've gone back into the home to devote themselves to child care, elderly care, household maintenance, what women did before the opportunities opened to them. And many women, when asked, why are you making this decision, explain, we can't afford quality child care and we're not willing to risk our children if it isn't quality child care. So it turns out for the family, it's better for me to stop working and to come back and go back into the home. This is a very serious shift. It reinforces a division of males working outside, women inside the home. Women for 40 years have been trying to break out of that limitation, to figure out a new way to combine work with shared work in the household. This is setting that process back, another cost of the crisis. Finally, another kind of tragic tale, but one with a lesson. A David Thyssen, an older gentleman with mental health problems, was recently placed on a bus in Las Vegas with a few bags of lunch, 1 day's medication. He had been suicidal as well as having mental problems, and sent to San Francisco. According to the city attorney of San Francisco, Dennis Herrera, he's one of many people put on buses in Las Vegas, and perhaps other places as well, and shipped to San Francisco. And Dennis Herrera, on behalf of the city of San Francisco, is suing the state of Nevada for funding and looking the other way while clinics in that state, mental health clinics, do this. I just want to alert everyone to what this means. Strapped cities and states, unable or unwilling to provide the services that a civilized society provides its people, is now reduced to trying to save money by putting suicidal mental patients on buses so that the burden of care for them is shifted to another state. Wow. Final report, David Thyssen is living on the streets of San Francisco, but the city has given him a free room, so he has a place to go. And he gets $100 a month. That's right. Suicidal mental patient needing help. And if you read the story in the newspapers about him, it's got a lot of play. You'll see that he's obviously a creative and intelligent fellow. But that's what we're doing. We're taking care of him by throwing him from one state to another, giving him a free room, and $100 a month for his life. Capitalism is a system that works. You must be kidding. Let me turn now to some major discussions that I would like to ask you to attend to with me. These begin with something that's very much in the news right now, namely the struggle over the debt ceiling. And I want to make sure everyone understands it, because much of the mainstream media's discussion is really fragmentary and leaves the kind of important issues out. What is the debt ceiling, first of all? The debt ceiling is a law passed by the United States Congress that basically says that before the federal government can borrow money, it has to get the permission of the Congress to do so. Periodically, when the government keeps borrowing, it bumps up against whatever the last limit was that the Congress 2 or 3 years earlier had put. And so to continue to be able to borrow, the government has to get the ceiling raised. That is, a bill has to go through the Congress allowing the government to borrow more. Why does the government have to borrow more? Well, as President Obama says, to pay its bills. Okay, but what are those bills? The government has been borrowing huge amounts of money in recent years for a very simple reason. And it's because it's been borrowing so much that it has a problem, because it keeps now bumping up against this ceiling. We had it a couple years ago, and here we are, we have it again. The reason the government is borrowing huge amounts of money is simple, but usually left out of the analysis. It's because of capitalism's crisis. And here's why. When you have a capitalist crisis, a breakdown in capitalism, millions of people are thrown out of work. We today have 10, maybe 20 million people either out of work or given up looking or having a part-time job when they really want and need a full-time. All of those people are not paying income tax the way they used to. All of those people are not paying payroll tax the way they used to. And not only is the government therefore cutting back its situation because not earning the taxes it used to, but it has to spend more money than it used to because of the crisis. It has to lay out more money for unemployment insurance for all those people without work. It has to lay out money for the food stamp program for people who haven't got enough to eat. And it has spent huge amounts of money bailing out big failed banks, big near-bankrupt corporations like AIG Insurance and General Motors in the automobile field. In other words, the government is borrowing money because a capitalist crisis is reducing its tax intake and increasing its anti-crisis costs. That's the reason. Now, what's happening? The Republicans don't want to raise the ceiling. They don't want to give the government the ability to borrow the money to pay the bills it has racked up and the bills it still has to pay, since the government is continuing to spend more than the crisis-reduced tax revenues it gets. So this is an attempt by the Republicans to hold up the ability of the government to function financially in the way that it has for the last umpteen years. And why? The Republicans say they want to make the point that the government is spending too much, even though spending has been quite drastically reduced over the last year or two. And number two, many of them are against the Obama health care plan, and they want that basically to be stopped. And so it's a game of tit for tat, and what hangs in the balance is the ability of the government to pay its bills and keep functioning, because it is regularly required to borrow to keep doing what it's doing in the situation of a crisis. So the basic cause of this whole dilemma is the crisis. The crisis plunges the government into a situation where it has to borrow, and now the Republicans and Democrats are fighting about whether the right to borrow more will be given, or whether the Democrats have to pay the price of cutting spending and canceling Obamacare. All right, this fight has happened before. For many years, it has happened regularly. Sometimes Republicans have been pushing to force the issue. That's the way it's happening now. But in the past, the Democrats have done the same thing. What's going on here that needs to be understood is not so much the details of the maneuvering of the two parties. They are clearly trying to milk this situation, each in its own way, for whatever political advantage they think they can get. I think the bigger questions here are the following. Is there an alternative to borrowing all this money, which would save the government from going further into debt and make the whole question of raising the debt ceiling irrelevant, because you wouldn't have a debt? Is something available to do that? And the simple answer is yes, of course. And anyone not caught up in the maneuvering knows it. If the government of the United States, federal government, were simply to tax corporations and the rich at the same rates that applied in the 1950s, 60s, or 70s, in a range, for example, of the personal income tax for the highest incomes between 70 and 91%, which is what they paid in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, then the flow of money into the government would mean that they wouldn't have bumped up against this debt ceiling. There would be no issue of raising the debt ceiling. There would be no leverage the Republicans could use, or that the Democrats have to fend off. But neither Republicans nor Democrats are willing to touch the question of taxing corporations and the rich at the levels they used to. So they pretend that's not an issue, that it's all about the details of maneuvering back and forth, when that is clearly not the case. Tragic, don't you think? But there's another dimension that I think has to be made clear. There are people, even in the higher ranks of the Republican and Democratic Party, who are understandably nervous about all of this grandstanding in front of the American people around the question of raising the debt ceiling. Why? For a good reason. What we are seeing is the kind of desperation of a capitalism that cannot solve its own problems. First, this capitalism creates a crisis, a vast loss of jobs, income, production, bankruptcy for many businesses, small, medium especially. This is a disaster. Then the system responds to this disaster by bailing out those at the top, promising it'll trickle down to the mass of people, the bailout. It doesn't, leaving the mass of people in all kinds of upset and anger, expressed in every way, from the Tea Party on the right to Occupy Wall Street on the left. The wealthy don't want to pay the taxes the way they used to, which could solve the problem. Neither the corporations nor the individual. The rich are digging in. We're not going to give you anything. We may have been the ones who brought you the crisis. We may have been the ones who got the bailout, but we're not going to allow you to touch us with taxes or anything like that. Meanwhile, the mass of people are getting more and more angry and upset about the deteriorating condition. Think of Margaret Mary, 83, dying destitute because she couldn't get enough money to live, having been a professor all her life. And many other examples. So the system isn't working. And the sign of it, the symbol of it, is the inability of the Congress to function, and now literally the threat that the government will stop borrowing money, which will mean it cannot pay its bills. It will have to tell somebody who expected to be paid that he or she is not going to get paid. A company that provided a service. A soldier who risked his or her life. A moneylender, a creditor who lent money to the government. Who's going to be told in what way, at what time, they're not going to get their money? The danger here is clear. Around the world, and inside the United States is becoming more and more dysfunctional. Its economic system is not working well, and its political system is freezing up in these endlessly repaid crises of dysfunctionality, of failure to perform. And here's why this is important. Around the world, wealthy people, large corporations, even foreign governments, place their money in the United States, and they've been doing it for 50 years, on the following idea. The United States is the safest place to park wealthy money. Wealthy businessmen, wealthy individuals, wealthy, you name it. It's safest because there's no question of capitalism. No one is threatening the system doesn't work. You put your money in, you get your money out. It's a secure bastion of perfectly performing capitalism. What this debt ceiling crisis suggests to people around the world is basically that the United States isn't anymore what it was. No one around the world is going to move more of his or her assets into the United States because of what's happening. They will only move less. They'll take some out. And here's what that means. We've had a really good ride for 50 years with people around the world becoming wealthy and parking some of that here. It's beefed up the deposits in our banks. It's helped our balance of payments with the rest of the world. It's brought more money into the United States to make our economy work better. But if we continue to have a dysfunctional capitalism, the happy ride up when the money came in will turn into a very tragic ride down, as besides our own problems, we face the impact of money leaving the United States because it isn't looking anywhere near as safe, as calm, as secure, and as business as usual the way it once did. Much is at stake here, and that's true whatever the resolution of this particular debt ceiling crisis happens to be. Let us take our short break at this point. Please stay with us. We will be back in a moment. Welcome back. This is Richard Wolff, and this program is Economic Update. Before we proceed to our next major discussion topic, I wanted to remind you again that both of our websites are available for you to follow the kinds of analysis we do here and to send us your questions, your comments, your ideas, which we value and read every one. The first website is RD Wolff, spelled W-O-L, 2 Fs, rdwolff.com. And the second website is Democracy at Work, all one word, democracyatwork.info, I-N-F-O. Over the last week, there were stunning, massive demonstrations by workers, hundreds of thousands of them, in the faraway Asian city of Dhaka and in other cities in the country of Bangladesh. And therein lies a story that I want to feature on our program today. Capitalism, that is, industries, one after another, used to be just manufacturing, but now it's all kinds of service industries, have been moving out of the United States, of Western Europe, and of Japan, and moving into places where wages are much, much lower, and so they can make much higher profits. They implant the same technology, the same machinery, they build the requisite factories, and then they bring in workers who will work for much, much less. The workers in Bangladesh are struggling to get a $100 per month minimum for their full-time labor. They're currently at about $40. So you can see the attraction of moving from the wage levels of North America, Western Europe, and Japan to the wage levels of places around the world like Bangladesh. What these demonstrations in Bangladesh show, however, is that when capitalists leave the countries where they've been basically for 200, 250 years as capitalism grew up, where over those years they had to come to an understanding with their workers to pay them decent wages, to provide them with pensions, at least a little, and medical care coverage, at least a little, and to give them reasonable hours and reasonable working conditions. The advantages of going to the rest of the world that was left out of the first 200 years of capitalism's improving conditions for the workers who fought against them in North America, Western Europe, and Japan. The attraction of these companies is to go to places where they can pay workers nothing and provide none of the conditions forced on them by centuries of struggle in the West and in Japan. But what the Bangladeshi workers are showing is that they won't permit capitalism in their country to recreate its awful history in North America, Western Europe, and Japan. They're not going to tolerate the conditions. You know, if you want to understand the early conditions of capitalism in England, read the novels of Charles Dickens. If you want to understand the arrival of capitalism in France, read the novels of Émile Zola. If you want to get an idea of the conditions of work of people in American capitalism, read Upton Sinclair or John Steinbeck or a host of others. The conditions in Bangladesh, in India, in China, and many of the countries to which capitalism is going are awful. They are terrible. But the workers are fighting back. And they're demanding better working conditions. And they're slowly going to get them, just like they did here. But it's very important that people understand capitalism is leaving the parts of the world where it grew strong, where it developed itself. North America, Western Europe, Japan. For 100, 200, sometimes even as much as 250 years in places like Britain. Capitalism developed. Capitalism slowly confronted by its workers in those countries, just as the workers in Bangladesh are doing today, gave those workers, had to, decent working conditions, decent labor standards, decent salaries. But as they leave Western Europe, North America, and Japan, and go to Bangladesh, they're recreating in the countries they go to the awful early conditions of capitalism everywhere. But now here's the second side of that coin. Not only are they creating and recreating the awful conditions and struggles in the new places to which capitalists are moving, but they're actually bringing them back in the older parts of the world that capitalism is leaving. Western Europe, North America, and Japan. That's why I talk as often as I do about places like Detroit, and in a few minutes about another city going through something like that, San Jose, California. As capitalism leaves, it kind of unravels the conditions of wages, working conditions, public services. Everything that was achieved over 200 years is being unwound because the capitalists are leaving and they don't have to pay to sustain the conditions they were forced to pay when they were here. so the conditions atrophy. Capitalists are more interested in supporting states in the countries they're going to than in the countries they're leaving. Cities are deteriorating, states are deteriorating. Nobody can pay for what was there. That's why we have adjuncts instead of full professors. That's why we have bankrupt major cities. That's why we're cutting back. That's what it's about. The decisions of capitalists undertaken in the interests of profit and the other desirable objectives of capitalist enterprises. That's what governs. We all live with the results, just like the workers in Bangladesh. They're in the streets as workers in America and Western Europe once were. But as the conditions deteriorate here, maybe the workers in this country and in Western Europe and in Japan will eventually say, no further, no more, just like the workers in Bangladesh. And then in an ironic twist of history that ought to give us all lots to think about, we will have finally brought to a kind of equivalence the rising conditions that workers like those in Bangladesh are bringing to the areas to which capitalism is moving, coming slowly to a level that the workers in advanced countries are having to suffer. Lower levels in the advanced, so-called advanced countries, Western Europe, North America, and Japan. As those conditions deteriorate and the conditions of workers in the third world rise because of actions like the Bangladesh workers, finally there will be a kind of parallel. Struggles of all workers confronting a capitalism that's relocating from one part of the world to another and trying to make a lot of money by doing it. Then here's the irony. The very old slogan that many have forgotten will suddenly become relevant again. Workers of the world unite. And the basis for such a union is actually being created by the capitalism against which that union will be directed. The writers who first penned that slogan, if they're looking down on us, must wonder about that irony and how it's coming to fruition and becoming real. Okay, in the time that remains for us, I want to deal at a bit more length than I often do with two of your questions. So let me change my perspective and deal with them. The first question has to do with a remarkable development which is affecting college scholarships in the United States. Here's the question. Are colleges really giving scholarships and financial help to those in need? That is, young people wanting to go to colleges and universities, but lacking the income by the accident of their birth to a family that doesn't have money compared to one that does. But in answering your question, and the simple answer is no, the actual need-based granting of scholarships is down, and it's down dramatically. The statistic, and this is a story from the September 24th New York Times, written by Catherine Rempel, the statistic is stark. Over the last 2 decades, the share of state aid that is not based on need has nearly tripled to 29% per full-time student. Wow. Wow. Financial aid from the government is shifting away from people who need it, and to whom? To people who have higher scores on examinations, particularly the scholastic aptitude tests that college students and their families are familiar with. Wow. What's going on? Why should that be happening? First, the basic reason for this is the drive of colleges and universities, particularly the private ones, to make more money. It is the rule of our economic system. The social costs of denying young people who need it a chance to go to school don't count. The colleges instead are saying to themselves, as many admit, we need to struggle to attract students. If we attract students who are successful, quote unquote, they will in turn give us money when they get older. If we attract students who are successful already, showing high scores, well then we'll get higher rankings in the national rankings of schools, and that will allow us to jack up our tuition rates because it'll be safe to do so because so many people want to come here. So we don't get much out of taking a student who's needy and may not have the best score, or who's needy and therefore may not be a good bet to give us a lot of money later when he or she is older. We can't afford that under the way capitalism in America is developing. So we're going to give more and more of our scholarships to people who are already looking like they're doing well, they have good scores, and who aren't quite as needy because that's a better shot to get money back. Okay, let's see what this means. Colleges are using the rule of money. They're really not in the first place educational institutions. They're in the first place profit-making institutions. Whether they pay taxes on those profits, call themselves tax-exempt, not-for-profit, that's really beside the point. The point is they're making decisions based on their financial needs as institutions and not on the nation's needs for qualified young people and on the nation's needs to give those from disadvantaged backgrounds a leg up so that we make up for the accident that they were born to a family that was unemployed or a family where one parent got sick or any of the other reasons that people don't have enough money to make it in this society. Wow. What is going on here? Well, a simple statistic answers. If you look at who gets higher scores on merit exams and you match it against the income of people, the families that they come from, the students' families, you learn something very quickly. Basically, the higher your income, the better you do on the scores. There's no mystery here. The higher your income, the more likely your parents are to be able to afford a tutor if you have trouble at early times in your life, to help you. The more likely your parents are to have the leisure to pay attention to how you're doing in school, because they aren't exhausted from 2-3 back-breaking jobs all day. That they have the money to introduce you to cultural events, to reading, to enjoying the process of learning. Those things go with money because they cost money in every case. So it's no surprise that people who do better on tests come from households that do better financially. We are now becoming a society which says, the game is over. You get born into a family with little or no money, you're done. You get born into a family that has some money, you got a chance. Gone is the notion of a democratic society in which everybody has an equal chance. Gone is the notion of a level playing field for everyone to discover and develop his or her talents. No, no, no. What we have is a society that rewards most those who already have the most. And the switch in colleges and universities from giving scholarships based on need as well as aptitude, but with need being the crucial determinant, that might have helped redress the unequal, undemocratic, and self-destructive in the long run situation we have. But it's not happening. In fact, we're shifting more and more state aid, which was the only hope of young people from modest means, is shifting more and more to effectively provide money not on the basis of need, but on the basis of accomplishment and merit on these exams. And that means providing more and more state support to the people who don't need it the most. Now, when you put that together with what I said earlier about adjuncts, about colleges saving a lot of money by paying professors very little, giving them no support, no retirement, no benefits, producing kinds of lives that ended up like Margaret Mary, as we saw. You put that together, that monetary focus, together with who they're giving state aid to, who's getting it, you can begin to see a pattern. We are saving colleges and universities' financial condition at the expense of the social mission they were supposed to be about finding capable young people and giving them the best education we could, as a matter of their right, as a matter of democratic commitment, and as a matter of what's best for the long run in the society. We're giving up on that, and that is a serious tragedy that no one should miss. Last part. I recently got a communication from Harvard University, the richest university in the United States, perhaps the world. And they proudly told me that they had increased their endowment, that's their funds, their wealth, by another $2 billion. If my memory serves, they did well last year. They now have about somewhere between $30 and $35 billion of endowment. That's their stocks, bonds, real estate holding. That's their wealth. That's not what they earn each year and spend on education. It's their wealth. They sit on that wealth. They invest that money not in education, but in buying shares of stock and fancy real estate and loans to businesses. That's what they do. That's not money that this educational institution is using for education. Oh yes, a small part of what they earn with that wealth goes to take care of Harvard students, who, if you look at the statistics, already come from many of the best income that you can get in the world. Rich people. Why in the world do we permit the atrophy of real education for millions, while the money that could pay for it sits in the vaults of a handful of rich universities? Harvard, Yale, Princeton. That is an outrage against the very education that these institutions claim they support. There's no justification for that that isn't at the same time a justification of gross inequality. Let me come now to the final story. I received 3 questions from those of you who watch and listen about the city of San Jose in California. The questions were kind of alarmed. We thought that San Jose, California's 3rd largest city, in the center of the Silicon Valley, arguably the leader, the vanguard of high-tech telecommunications, software revolution in America and in the world, and therefore very successful. How could the city of San Jose be having the kinds of trouble that most intelligent Americans associate with places like Detroit or Cleveland? As one observer said, San Jose is not in the Rust Belt. But yet San Jose is in fact facing very serious economic problems. And I want to go over them because I want not only to stress that these problems are happening across America and are not limited to the attention-grabbing, headline-screaming collapses of places like Detroit into bankruptcy and so on. That it's a national phenomenon. That it's the breakdown of capitalism as a system showing up as the crisis of cities and states. But that's what's happening in in San Jose, California. I'll give you just a few statistics. They have cut all of the services of the city, virtually every one over the last few years. Libraries, community centers, number of city workers reduced, salaries reduced, new facilities left unused because there's no staff being paid for. From potholes to home burglaries, one story read, the city's problems are growing. The mayor of San Jose is a Democrat, and you'll see why that's important in a moment. And he created a referendum last year and got 70% of the people to support the referendum to take steps to deal with the fact that San Jose has less revenue coming in because of the economic crisis, which also affected high-tech industries, like everything else. And he has a problem, the mayor, because they don't have the revenue. And he has a decision to make. Can he get revenue to replace the money lost from the crisis? He doesn't want to. He doesn't propose taxing businesses, and he doesn't propose taxing the wealthy, those in the best position to pay, those who haven't paid for a long time, and those who've done the best over the last 30 years. Them he doesn't want to deal with. So what is he proposing? Wow. And please pay attention, because this is a show that may be coming to your town in the not-so-distant future. First, he wants to go after the pensions. Let me say a word about this, because this is stunning. Pensions are not what caused the problems of America's cities. The crisis did. The crisis that threw people out of work. That's not the fault of people on pensions. The crisis that turned the government into a bailout factory, giving money to the big banks and others, and therefore starving everybody else, that's not something the pensioners had anything to do with. So it's very strange when cities and towns and states are in trouble, and the federal government is in trouble because of an economic crisis brought to you by this system we live with, capitalism, that instead of dealing with that, and the failure of corporations and the rich to pay anything like the taxes they used to pay, or anything remotely like their fair share, we instead turn on the old people who've finished a life of working for our cities and states and start taking away their pensions. But no matter. Mayor Chuck Reed, the Democrat of San Jose, proposes to cut pensions, to create a two-tier pension system. Leave alone those who have pensions now, but all future hires get paid much lower pensions. We have a two-tier system. For older folks, they are fading out on the old system. All the new ones coming in, and even some of the current workers, are going to have to live with less pension. That's part of the downgrade of the conditions of life of American working people, coming from a capitalism that isn't interested in this part of the world, but is focused elsewhere, like in the Bangladesh example I gave you. But I'm struck by the reality that Mr. Reed in San Jose is like Mayor Rahm Emanuel in Chicago, and like the treasurer in Rhode Island, Gina Raimondo. They're all Democrats. And here is a quote in the New York Times on the 24th of September from Chuck Reed, the mayor of San Jose. Quote, "I think it needs to be led by Democrats." He's referring to the attack on pensions. "It can't become something Republicans are doing to unions." Let me drive home what that man just said. Republicans can't pull it off, this attack on working people's conditions, their pensions, and all the rest. It has to be Democrats, the ostensible friends of labor, who do it. Because that will confuse and divide working people, and that'll get the job done. And what's the job? Cutting not just the wages and salaries of workers as capitalists move out, but also the wages and salaries of public employees, and thus the services they provide to the American people. Capitalism is not working for the United States, for Western Europe, and Japan. It's leaving, and it's abandoning the areas where it grew rich and powerful for new areas that are beckoning with higher profits. The fundamental question is whether the working people of North America, Western Europe, and Japan will permit this, just as the people in Bangladesh are determined not to permit a replay there of what early capitalism was here. Thank you for your attention. This is Richard Wolff, Economic Update. I hope you will join me again next week.